Chapter 1. 57 days after the Battle of Endor. In any ordinary fleet, the Adjudicator would have stuck out like a sore thumb. At over 7 kilometers long, the Bellator-class Super Star Destroyer dwarfed most ships within the Empire's navy in both size and firepower. It was a sleek but imposing vessel, and it easily carried more weapons than any 5 rebel ships. Today, however, the Adjudicator was not part of an ordinary fleet. On every size of the massive Super Star Destroyer were even still more massive dreadnoughts, executors, mandators, even an assertor, indescribably large warships floating menacingly above a shining planet. These behemoths and their accompanying fleets allowed the Adjudicator to, for once, go almost unnoticed. Inside the Adjudicator, a repulsor lift silently arrived at its destination. Durasteel doors opened with a hiss, and Imperial Fleet Admiral Cain Aldeon entered the bridge of his recently acquired flagship. Flanked by stormtroopers, he passed Imperial technicians and engineers, lower officers, and troopers on patrol, all who noticed his insignia and, likely the way he carried himself, and stopped working to salute him. Aldeon paid them no mind. People had been saluting him since the Clone Wars, and the novelty had long wore off. The graying, but still strong and sharp Imperial, flanked by his guards, continued through the bridge, climbing stairs and arriving at an elevated viewing and command platform. Before doing anything else, he turned to survey the other occupants of the bridge, most of who had returned to work. Aldeon paid particular attention to the officers and technicians, all human men, as is typical, he thought. He was glad to see that despite a dwindling military, the Empire hadn't yet begun scratching the bottom of the barrel. He turned to face the darkness of space, staring at the massive armada which accompanied the Adjudicator over the planet Coruscant. He counted 7-star dreadnoughts, including his own. He couldn't be bothered to count how many Star Destroyers flanked the larger ships, but he estimated over 50. Other support ships, corvettes, and carriers supplemented the fleet, and he noticed small transports and shuttles moving between the larger capital ships, likely carrying supplies, officers, and information. Now that most of the local defense ships had reported in, he would soon know exactly how large his new force was. 4 days ago, when he first arrived at the rendezvous point, Aldeon's response to seeing such a large collection of Imperial assets was pride. Even in these dark days, the Empire still knew how to show force. However, now, standing on the bridge of his Star Destroyer, he felt disgusted. A fraction of these ships, perhaps a single dreadnought or even just the extra support ships, would have protected the Empire from a devastating defeat at the Battle of Endor. The Adjudicator alone had 2 entire squadrons of experimental TIE Avengers, ships which would have easily tore the comparatively outdated rebel starfighters apart. He sighed audibly, a rare crack in his ordinarily hard exterior. The Admiral was an intelligent man, one forged by decades of war. He understood why the Emperor only dedicated such a small part of the Imperial Navy to Endor. With more ships, the Alliance would have noticed a movement of forces and the careful traps that would have never been sprung. Still, while the Emperor was a master strategist, he was not a brilliant military tactician. The loss at Endor was preventable. Weeks before the battle, Grand Admiral Thrawn had suggested that, instead of using a fleet comprised mostly of Imperial 2 Star Destroyers, ships notoriously poor at screening against enemy fighters, that the fleet be supplemented with smaller, faster corvettes. It would have taken them days to arrive at the system, but they would have been able to do so without detection. The Emperor was not keen on waiting. He ignored the Chiss's advice, leaking the station plans to the Alliance, and departing for the unfinished Death Star. It was a bad move, and the Emperor's impatience and his overconfidence may now result in the downfall of the Empire. Much of the Imperial High Command was lost during the destruction of the second Death Star, including, of course, Palpatine himself. For years, the military had been largely decentralized, with Moffs and Grand Moffs overseeing local sectors and working with admirals to manage local fleets. But, while the Emperor was still around, every single person in the military and political hierarchies individually answered to Palpatine and the administrative structure he created around himself. After the abolition of the Senate and the effective neutering of every check and balance against him, Palpatine himself effectively controlled most of the Empire. With the destruction of the second Death Star, the Empire lost much of its centralized and unifying power. This was an immediate disaster. The Navy was already spread thin. While the Empire possessed at least 100 dreadnoughts and tens of thousands of smaller ships, it was responsible for governing a galaxy of millions of planets and seemingly unending sources of rebellion. While the remaining Imperial civilian and military high command tried to restore order, chaos erupted among individual sector heads, fleet admirals, and ship commanders. Immediately, several high-ranking Imperials defected to the Rebel Alliance's newly formed New Republic, hoping to avoid trials and executions. Notably, much of the Galactic Core was now in the hands of the New Republic, as were several of the fleets stationed there. Admiral Aldeon knew that the Empire would soon lose its grip even on Coruscant, which would surely become the capital of the New Republic Republic, which currently sat at Corellia. Confusion and chaos dominated the Empire for weeks. While some Moffs defected, others joined together with fleet admirals and military assets in an effort to assert themselves as the new rulers of the Empire. Many ships and soldiers were lost to pointless infighting. Somehow, peace was eventually brokered throughout the splintered Empire, and new leadership emerged. The Empire's Retributory Council was formed, comprised mainly of senior Moffs, surviving personal advisors to Palpatine, and naval and military leaders. The council met on Coruscant, later moving to Biss, and set the direction for the Empire moving forward. While himself a fleet admiral, Aldeon was not well enough connected to sit on the council. Still, he was glad the Empire had direction moving forward. The first order of the council was delivered 5 days ago. He thought back to that day, to watching the encrypted live holofeed after a skirmish with rebel forces in his previous flagship, a modified heavy Imperial 2 Star Destroyer. A figure had appeared, an impossibly old human woman, covered by a dark black cloak with a red trim. She boomed in a cybernetically enhanced voice that the Empire's first major goal would be the collection and organization of resources. Key planets and sectors would be reinforced for the time being, including Coruscant, where the Imperial capital city was being evacuated, Biss, where the Imperial High Command had retreated, and where much of the Empire's secrets lay dormant, several systems in the Outer Rim, wild space in the Unknown region, and even an outpost in the neighboring Rishi Maze galaxy, areas where the Empire would presumably begin to rebuild, away from the eyes of the New Republic. There were also some odd planets which even the Fleet Admiral did not recognize, Korriban, Chachadas, and others. This was only step 1 of the Retributory Council's plans. Much of the orbital ring surrounding Kuwat, which the Empire had long used as the primary source of capital ship production, had been disabled in an attack only days after Endor. Manufacturing capabilities would need to be established elsewhere. The Empire was going to need, after all, new ships. Beyond that, the Fleet Admiral was out of the loop. The transmission was ended with a hopeful statement. The Emperor may be dead, but his grand vision lives on, and his final plans for the galaxy shall be enacted by those of us who remain. Fleet Admiral Aldeon had been assigned to Coruscant, and was the highest-ranking naval officer in orbit. On the surface, the Empire was busy. Key personnel were still being evacuated, records were being copied and destroyed, and assets were being shipped to other parts of the galaxy. It would not be possible to hold Coruscant indefinitely. Even with the Icmuninopolis's advanced planetary defenses, the local sector populations were far too anti-imperial and had taken both the streets and the stars to make it clear that the Empire was no longer welcome. They could not be suppressed, and already carried out several terrorist acts. The New Republic would also soon muster the strength to attack. And although the Fleet Admiral was sure that the amassed Imperial forces could survive one round of fighting, even their forces would be eventually whittled down. It was losing battle, and all Aldeon and his ships needed to do was give the people on the ground time. A junior officer carrying a cup of Manel and Jasper climbed the steps of the bridge's viewing platform. Manel and Jasper was a favorite tea of Aldeon's, and he had been obsessed with it since trying it for the first time during a brief visit to the Death Star. He brought a stockade of the tea with him when he moved his command to the Arbitrator, and always sent for it upon taking the deck. He smelled the woodsy drink, thinking back to his time on the first Death Star. Palpatine himself had requested that he attend the battle station. He still vividly remembered being summoned to the Emperor's office on Coruscant. He remembered entering Palpatine's dark quarters, his eyes drawn first not to the Emperor, but to a hollow projector displaying a map in the middle of the room. The sector shown on the map was not one that he recognized, though, to be fair, he wouldn't have recognized every corner of the galaxy at a glance. Still, something was off about the whole thing. The orientation of the stars, the galactic backdrop, something. But before he could investigate further, the hollow map flickered off and Palpatine turned his chair, his reptilian yellow eyes and pale skin illuminating the area where he had just seconds ago been sitting, unseen. He grinned at the Fleet Admiral Aldeon and, suddenly, Aldeon was jolted out of his memory by a blaring klaxon, now sounding throughout the bridge. The alarm was accompanied by a set of roving red lights. Scanners began to buzz and communication arrays activated. However, Aldeon did not need to look at scans to see what was going on. Ahead, a shining fireball blossomed in space, enveloping the bridge of a Tector-class Star Destroyer. Next to it, an already disabled Victory class was falling to the planet below, Coruscant's gravity pulling the ship to its doom. Nearby, an Imperial 2 was cracked open, its insides spilling out into cold space. No, Aldeon thought to himself. This is far too early. How could the rebels have mounted a sufficient force so quickly? And how could they have surprised us wait a minute. As the bridge bustled, with commanders shouting orders and messages being sent to ship departments, Fleet Admiral Aldeon watched in horror as Coruscant's planetary defenses strategically and systematically cut apart the gathered Imperial fleet. Aldeon had to act. Already, lesser officers had populated the command platform with him, ready for his orders. Ahead of the adjudicator, the 28 engines of the 15,000 1,000-meter long Assertor-class Super Star Destroyer Significance blinked out one by one as the ship lost its power. Aldeon turned towards the nearest tactical display, but was knocked on his feet as the bridge was hit by some sort of weapon. He was cheek down on the cold floor as a mouse droid screeched past his face. The sounds of battle continued blaring overhead. As he stood up, he felt for the first time in a very long time fear. The tactical display now indicated incoming hyperspace jump. He returned his gaze to the window just in time to see dozens of ships appear out of hyperspace. As the adjudicator was again rocked by another volley of ordnance, he said out loud, without even realizing it, the New Republic has arrived. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. That was Chapter 1 of my, as of now, untitled Star Wars What If series. I've always been kind of dissatisfied with how Star Wars handled the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Endor, how the Empire fell, how the New Republic was formed and managed to form a functional government. And really, I've just found that Legends and canon kind of totally mess with the sense of scale and the logistics needed to run a galactic empire and really to rule the galaxy. So this is my attempt at creating a realistic version of the Star Wars universe post-Empire and post the Battle of Endor. I'm going to be disregarding Star Wars Legends and Star Wars canon, but I will be drawing things from them that I like. Also, this takes a lot of work, and while I do have the whole plot kind of set up in my mind, I haven't actually written each individual chapter. So if you guys don't like this kind of video, if you guys don't like the story, I won't be continuing, and if it doesn't really pick up, if I don't get like, say, 1,000 likes or something like that, I probably won't continue just because it takes a lot of time that I could be spending, making Star Wars verses or Star Wars lists or other content that you guys seem to enjoy. If you guys did like this, please let me know down in the comments. I'm not by any stretch an expert writer, and I've never, of course, recorded for an audiobook or anything before. So I know it's a little amateurish, and I know it's still early, but I do think you guys will enjoy the story as it progresses. So if you like, give it a like, share with your friends, and of course, subscribe if you haven't already. In future episodes, I will have something for you guys to look at while I'm reading, some sort of visuals, some sort of video at parts, pictures and other parts, kind of like my typical video, but for this one, where it's the first one, I figured I would just put the focus on the story. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, guys. As always, may the Force be with you.